extremely honored to give this lecture this year. I have seen the list of eminent speakers who came before me. I'm impressed. It's generating some pressure, I have to say. Then I would like to thank again Stavros Malas and his team for the wonderful way we have been treated and the interest generated by his institute. Thanks, of course, Edouard, for this presentation that is slightly overemphasizing my career, but doesn't matter. So what I will try to do, there will be two parts in my talk. In the first part, will be very positive, and the next one will be less positive. So the positive one is just to go through a little bit of history of medicine, to tell you things I think mostly you know, that is, there have been terrific advances in medicine over the centuries, but more specifically since the Second World War. But then I will switch to discuss, and this explaining my weird title, that these advances may not always be translated in advances for better health of the population, and what are the issues we may discuss if I have time. So the best way to look at how medicine advances is to look at the simplest indicator, that is life expectancy. So here is shown the life expectancy in France. We have data since mid-18th century, and you see that there has been, as in other countries, and you will see Cyprus in a short while, which is parallel, I would say, basically, that since, I would say, the mid-19th century, things have changed dramatically, and the life expectancy that was around 40 years, with a massive death of children below the age of 5, has progressively and quite significantly improved, reaching now more than 80 years. For women, it's 84 or 85 in France, and for men, 81. Of course, there were accidents associated with wars, but it's more interesting to see why did the life expectancy progress so well. Basically, in the 19th century, this is not medicine. This is better standard of life, better nutrition, better hygiene, even before microbes were known, so better lodging. But then in the 20th century came advances in medicine with vaccination, antibiotics, and other drugs. There are the last accident we had, obviously, is the I don't know, well, anyway, is the COVID here, but things are doing better since we have recovered from it. So just to indicate where Cyprus lies, I mean, in the same figures, so you are progressing, maybe the curve, I don't know exactly how it was over the centuries, but basically you are following the same trend. Of course, we are not going to have a life expectancy of 100 years in 10 years from now, but still this is interesting to see that. And not only there is an improvement in life expectancy, but also there is a better life expectancy in good health. Sorry, I will just show you, illustrate the data for France. Please concentrate on the two bottom lines, which indicate so the expectancy to be in good health, starting from the age of 65. So in yellow, these are the women, of course, always better than men in terms of performing in life as well as in quality of life. And in blue, the men. So the data starts in 2008. So these are only data from the last 16 years, because before 2008, we have no data available. But what is quite spectacular and actually not known, and sometimes even people say the contrary, is that, as you can read on the bottom right, we in France, I'm sure this is the case in most European countries, including Cyprus, the life expectancy in good health, I have no time to go into definitions, but you can understand the concept, has advanced by almost 2 years in 15 years. This is just extraordinary. And I think we have to keep that in mind for further discussion. So now back to the past. Medicine, obviously, has been always a preoccupation of human beings. And even at the Paleolithic age, I like very much this picture because it shows probably the remnants of the oldest known a medical intervention. This is a skeleton from the Borneo island, and what is shown here that actually this person had an amputation of part of his, I think this is the left leg, if I'm not wrong, but he survived when he was a child, and this person survived at least for 20 years. This can be determined by the growth of the bone. So imagine 30,000 years ago, without any anesthesia, any sterilization, anything, this has been done. So this is just fantastic. And then medicine, of course, has advanced through further observation and then empiric, as you will see, interventions. And I like this other example. This is a small statue that is in the Getty Museum in Los Angeles of this person. So the statue is more than 2,000 years old, and you can see that the skin of this person doesn't look normal, and I have the impression that he is scratching his back. Maybe there is itching. So obviously this is an illustration and depicting skin disease a long time ago. But perhaps I would like to stress two very significant medical advances that occurred only through observation and empirism before the science as we consider it now was operational. The first one is obviously vaccination. Modern vaccination started at the end of the 18th century in UK with Jenner, so exactly in 1796, where he started vaccination against against pox by using the vaccine, a virus, but of course he didn't know it was a virus that was infecting the cows and also the people taking care of the cows. And this vaccine has been extremely efficient since the end of the 18th century up to now. It saved millions of lives, and it generated the eradication of this disease, this deadly disease, which is a spectacular results. And again, I would like to insist, this was done at a time where microbes were not known, including, of course, viruses. There was absolutely no concept of immunology, so just based on observation and empirism. This is very spectacular. And today, just to illustrate further the importance that vaccination has taken, this figure is taken from a publication of last year in Lancet from the WHO, showing that in the last 50 years, vaccination against 14 diseases, like measles, tetanus, and so on, has saved an estimate of 154 million lives in the world. So this is the most spectacular result of medicine that has been achieved up to now. Another illustration back to the 19th century is with the Hungarian doctor Semmelweis, who was working in Vienna, in Austria, and he was an obstetrician. So this is 1847. At the time, bacteria were not recognized as the cause of infectious diseases. This was not known. But empirically, he observed that at that time, the midwives and the doctors, the obstetricians, who were taking care of pregnant women, and then unfortunately went to make autopsies of women who died a few days post delivery. So that is mixed up between autopsy and the fact to deliver the pregnancies was not a bad idea, and that something wrong was happening, not knowing again that this was something infectious. So he proposed empirically that this person should wash their hands with a chlorine solution. Okay, and by doing so, abruptly, as you can see on the left-hand side panel, the mortality of women that was extremely high, just 13 to 18%, went down to less than 1%. Before we knew about, before Pasteur, before Koch. This is fantastic. This guy had huge difficulties to convince his colleagues to adopt, what he has proposed. It took 20 years to validate this fantastic finding. So I think observation is important. But of course, there has been a shift to advances to more what we could consider today as classic science, with the era in the mid-19th century of the beginning of experimentation in biology, and the time where the key concepts of biology were proposed by this 6 pioneers, just to mention them briefly. Darwin, of course, with the theory of evolution. Mendel for the genetics, although his studies were forgotten until the beginning of the 20th century. Claude Bernard, because of what we call the milieu intérieur, the physiology and experimentation. Virchow in Germany, who defined the concept of a cell as the unit of living organisms. And on the right-hand side, Pasteur and Koch, who, of course, who developed the microbial theory and made visible what Semmelweis and others had indirectly suspected years before. But actually, if medicine then advanced from 1850 to now, this is because medicine could be based on more strict and rigorous scientific approaches, actually all fields. I will illustrate it with physics, but this is also the case, for mathematics and obviously computer science. Mathematics, but even at the end of the 18th century, was used for the first time to define statistics in medicine and to develop what we now named controlled clinical trials. This is something that is very rigorously based, but that started at the end of the 18th century. And I will illustrate what physics has brought to medicine. This is not only because Edouard is here, because this is the reality. Of course, it started, for instance, at the level in a medicine first, then I will go to cells and molecules. Röntgen, this is this famous X-ray picture of of Mrs. Röntgen hand, absolutely. Well, this is, of course, and this was the beginning of a fantastic advance in medicine, up to, if we now consider what's going on, thanks to the advances in physics, for instance, magnetic resonance imaging has developed as a major tool of medicine, and one of the most recent examples, for instance, is this high field magnetic resonance used to study here, in this case, the brain at the Commissariat à l'Énergie Atomique in Paris, so with a 11.7 Tesla machine. So you can see on the image, for instance, on the right-hand side in B or in C on the right, that the definition of image is much, much, much better than it was with previous system of imaging, leading to a level of resolution which is quite spectacular, because now they can detect, so the pictograms will represent 0.2 times 1 millimeter times 1 millimeter of volume of the brain, so approximately a few thousand neurons. So this is just incredible, the level of resolution that can be achieved, and of course this will be translated in some advances in understanding the physiology of the brain function, but also in terms of medicine. Now at the other extremes, with molecules, the technology of electronic cryomicroscopy, helped with, by the way, AI, has been also instrumental in medicine. Just one recent example. So this is the image, the 3D image of the spike, so the protein that is at the envelope of the SARS-CoV-2 virus, against which vaccines have been developed. And to determine this image has been absolutely critical to modify slightly the way the vaccines were designed in order to have a stable protein induced by messenger RNA to get efficient vaccination. So this was extremely important. Another aspect I like to show is the progress overall in the analysis of molecules. Again, starting in the 50s with John Kendrew in the UK, with this is the first image of a molecule, myoglobin, so a key molecule of muscles, as observed by X-ray diffraction, up to, for instance, as many more examples based on both analysis by physical tool and AI, and the so-called AlphaFold program. For instance, here, this is the determination of the structure of the proteins that form nuclear pore complex, so the communication between the cytoplasm and the nucleus of cells. So these are major advances, all derived from physics, and this methodology has led today to predict the structure of more than 200 million proteins from living organisms. So this is a fantastic tool for scientists. Now, this is not only physics, obviously, chemistry. Of course, if one thinks about drugs, this is obvious, but also eventually biology, following the Second World War, mostly with the advance of molecular biology, the advances in understanding both the structure and function of DNA, RNA, and many other molecules in living cells. And this led to, now for application to medicine, to a molecular but reductionist approach. I will show you an example to try to make clear what I'm trying to say based on the study of one given disease. That here, this is the way to study, say, one molecular pathway, one biological pathway behind a given function, and sometimes to detect that this pathway is abnormal, leading to a given disease and perhaps a therapy. Let's illustrate it with one example, which is chronic myeloid leukemia. This is one of the most frequent forms of leukemias, where some of the leukocytes, namely the neutrophils, are growing without control and will kill the patient in the absence of treatment. What was determined some time ago, that in cancer cells, there is an abnormal rearrangement of chromosome between chromosome 9 and 22, so that what we call it translocation, so they are now associated, and at the border between the elements from chromosome 9 and chromosome 22, there is actually a synthetic gene that is obtained by fusion, which is it's an abnormal gene. And this gene in such cells is encoding a protein that is an enzyme, so catalyzing a reaction. And this enzyme is expressed continuously without any control. And this is leading to the uncontrolled cell proliferation. So when this was understood, immediately it led to generate a drug, that was in the year 2000, that specifically inhibits this what's called BCR-ABL protein. And now, since 25 years, patients are being treated by such drugs. There are many more have been developed that control the proliferation. So it's a beautiful example where the understanding of a single molecular event, this is rare in medicine, but it occurs, has led to a treatment that is completely not curing, but almost curing the patients. The patients have to be treated for life in order to maintain their good clinical status, but this is quite spectacular. Unfortunately, this is not the case for most of the diseases that have a more complex pathophysiology. So the reality is that reductionism for medicine has led to some advances, as the one I just described, but also has limitations. Just consider briefly the complexity of a human being. We have approximately 22,000 genes. In a given cell at a given time, several thousands of them are active, and of course this is varying as a function of the physiology. Then in addition of the genes to the DNA, they are regular, of course in the genome itself there are many regulatory elements, and then there are many what we call ribonucleic acids, RNA, those that are coding, the messenger RNA, and many others that are regulating the expression of genes. So this is leading to a quite potential expression of a number of proteins, more than 100,000, more than there are genes, because some genes may lead to different proteins as a function of the way the RNA is modified. And at the level of cells, in our body, we have something like 10 to the 13th cells, which is quite a lot, belonging to something like 200 different types. And then we are not sterile people. We are living in good relationship with a number of microbes. For instance, just as an example, more bacteria in our gut, in the colon, that we have cells in our body. Okay, and this is, we know more and more that this so-called microbiota is extremely important to maintain good health. We are also carrying lots of viruses that are not pathogenic, but we are living with them. And then, of course, the question of time. I mentioned that life expectancy is now above 80, so many things can happen. And of course, we are human beings. We are not always behaving in a rational way. So as a function of the way we behave, as a function of our environment, this has many consequences of the biology of our system. So the key question from now and the future is how can we assess such a complexity in terms of trying to translate these informations into medical intervention. And obviously this is now to consider the systemic approach to try to integrate many types of data about one human being or about a population. So I would say today, the 21st century, if I continue my historical sketch, we are leading to something where AI is going to play an important role, and modelization globally, to try to define this complexity behind most of the medical issues we are still facing today. So obviously, one way to go further in therapeutics today is to try to integrate these many data from so the clinical presentation, imaging, pathology, and the omics. By omics, I mean that is DNA sequence, determination in a given tissue of what are the RNA expressed that could be done at the single cell level or the level of tissues, proteins, and different metabolites. So we can generate a huge amount of data for a single person at different time points. So integration and of this complexity is really tough. So this circle is supposed to summarize what I am just saying. On the left-hand side, you see the things one can determine, again, omics, about RNA, DNA, and so on. Lots of proteins, metabolites, the microbiota I mentioned for the gut, but it's also the case for the skin or the mouth, for instance. And then imaging, if I go downstream, then one can record even at distance a number of biological parameters, like electrocardiogram on dosage of a number of substances in the blood. And then we have to consider the environment. And so all of these may be integrated and will be integrated more and more to design what is on the right-hand side, a number of interventions, including, for instance, virtual clinical trials on digital twins from a patient. We are not there, but this is the direction. So besides this future, I'd like to stress some advances that occurred over the last years. I will not discuss chemicals and drug discovery, although the drug discovery has been revolutionized by the capacity we have today, as I mentioned, with the AlphaFold technique, and then with physical imaging of molecules to look at interactions between important molecules of our body with potential drugs. This is speeding up very significantly the way to find new chemicals. But I would like to talk a little bit more about bioreagents, starting with antibodies. I think everyone knows what are antibodies, proteins produced by white cells named lymphocytes that attack microbes, viruses, and protects ourselves against infectious agents. So it's possible to manipulate these antibodies. This started in the 70s in UK, in Cambridge, by Cesar Milstein, who got the Nobel Prize because of this, and to generate monoclonal antibodies, that is as many kilograms, if you wish, of a given antibody that target a microbe, a cell, a given protein. And today, this has led to a major advance in medicine through different forms of antibodies that are depicted on the top of this slide. I will not, of course, go into details. There are more and more ways of using these molecules. But today, there are hundreds of drugs that have been generated based on these antibodies. Mostly, this is shown on the panel, the bottom panel, to treat cancer cells. So this is the first line, oncology. So this picture comes from 2022. So it is an underestimation of the situation today. There are largely more than 50 different drugs that are antibodies to treat cancer, for instance. Then autoimmune disease, inflammatory disease, infectious disease, and so on and so on. So it's a major change in medicine. And this is illustrated by the increasing place of biotherapies, as illustrated here, by the number of approved drugs by the FDA in the US, starting from 1998 up to 2023. So in dark blue, these are the chemicals, and in light blue, these are the biotherapies, including antibodies. And if we try to summarize this picture, we have this. So biotherapies accounted for approximately 10% of new drugs 25 years ago, and today they are reaching half of them. So it's a major change that is occurring in medicine. But besides antibodies, I will quickly mention also the development of cell therapy and tissue therapy. Just one example, which is a very preliminary piece of data, but I find quite impressive. This is the data coming from China, where using the so-called development of induced pluripotent stem cells, which means that from, say, skin fibroblasts, you take a little bit of skin, you isolate the cells that are named fibroblasts, to genetically modify them in order that they differentiate into a stem cell, able to generate all of the tissues, mostly, or not all, but virtually all of the tissues. So this came from a work of a Japanese scientist named Yamanaka in 2010. So here in this example, a Chinese group by taking such a skin biopsy from a patient with diabetes, has been able to differentiate in the laboratory these cells into cells producing insulin. Then these insulin-producing cells were reimplanted to the patient, and since that time, here there is 1 year follow-up in this case, the patient has no longer a diabetes, he's producing the insulin he needs. So this is very preliminary, but very encouraging. Though this is quite a complex therapeutic strategy that is it won't be feasible to use it for millions of patients, but still, this is an advance and a hope. Then, since 25 years, DNA-based therapy, namely gene therapy, and now RNA-based therapy are being developed, so it's another aspect of biotherapy. I could not speak a little bit about gene therapy because this is a little bit of my field. So there are two ways of doing gene therapy, either using viruses to introduce, these are the black rectangle, a given gene into cells that are persisting in different ways. I'm not going into details. And more recently, by the genome editing system using the now famous CRISPR-Cas9 system, it's also possible, and in a more precise way, to modify the genome. So with these two kinds of strategy, as written on the top right-hand side panel, one can mitigate a mutation's consequence, so replace or correct a gene mutation. One can inactivate a gene that is playing a deleterious role, or one can confer a new function, for instance, to fight cancer cells. So today there are 3 applications to correct a genetic disease, and today there are more than 20 genetic diseases that have been efficiently corrected by using this strategy. The very now famous CAR T-cell strategy is used to treat cancer, so by modifying the lymphocytes from the patient, so some white cells from patients with cancer, so that these white cells now will attack the cancer cells. This is feasible for some form of cancer. And very recently, it also became a strategy to treat some autoimmune diseases. Just to illustrate it, I will go back to our own work we did some years ago about the severe combined immunodeficiency that Edouard Brezin has mentioned. So this is a very simplified picture of how our blood cells are being made in the bone marrow. So we have stem cells that are able to self-renew. So we have a constant pool of such cells throughout life, but they can also differentiate into the different white cells on the top, lymphocytes, the erythrocytes, of course, the red cells, and other cells, the platelets for coagulation. So this is a normal picture of bone marrow. So there are patients where, as you see, the top part is missing. What is missing are the T lymphocytes and NK lymphocytes. I don't go into the detail because they have a genetic defect. The gene is mutated, impairing the development of these cells. And this can't be associated with a long life because we need these lymphocytes to fight infections. So after having characterized the molecular defect in these patients, we were able to generate viral vectors to infect the stem cells in order to regenerate, this is on the left-hand side panel, with the blue rectangle that is supposed to represent a normal copy of the gene that is mutated in these patients, to regenerate the production of T lymphocytes as well as NK lymphocytes. And the right panel showed you that the first patients treated 25 years ago, most of them are alive, actually 17 out of 20. So they are now adults living normally thanks to this gene therapy. So that was the beginning of a story leading to many more applications. Okay, drugging RNA, this is very fashionable these days because it's even simpler to synthesize RNA in vitro, and you can do a lot of things with RNA, and everybody knows that the most important vaccine that has been developed against SARS-CoV-2 was based on messenger RNA, providing the genetic information to have the synthesis of the spike protein I showed you earlier, so that the immune system will react against this spike protein and protect against SARS-CoV-2. But there are many other potential applications. I mean, one can modify in different ways messenger RNA, and one can also use RNA molecules that inhibit other RNA functions. I will not go into too many details, but just to let you know that this is an important way of research to progress in medicine these days, and the first applications are now arising, such as the one mentioned on the right panel about a disease named alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency. Another important, and I will finish here with the advances in medicine that occurred recently, is the capacity to deliver in vivo drugs, especially messenger RNAs, as done for the vaccine, but potentially other molecules, by using nanolipid particles, so very small fat particles. And this is mostly the work of Peter Cullis in Canada. This is a major advance that will lead to a better use of RNA, DNA, as well as other molecules to be delivered in vivo. Okay, that's where we stand. Of course, this is not comprehensive. I have not talked about robotic surgery and many other advances of medicine, but just to illustrate that medical research is moving fast. Still, there are many, many challenges ahead of us. Just to cite a few, we are unable today to treat efficiently degenerative diseases, neurodegenerative diseases, but also degenerative diseases of the eye or of the ear. The mental health issues are unfortunately so far not been correctly addressed by medicine. There are still a number of thousands of genetic rare diseases, but altogether they are not, that represents quite a number of patients for which we have no treatment. There are still a number of cancers that are refractory to treatment. And then there are also a group, many conditions that are related, at least in part, to our behavior and our environment. So, I mean, obesity is very much dependent, obviously, on the way of nutrition and exercise, with consequences as diabetes, addiction, allergy, that the frequency of which is rising, new infectious agents like the COVID, but also the issue of resistance to antibiotics, pollution, the climate changes. So there are many, many issues in front of us. Obviously, those diseases that are mostly the consequence of behavioral attitude and environment can be tackled, at least in part, by prevention. So it's a key message, I would say, in medicine today is to promote prevention. And the load that is generated by all of these conditions is pretty high in terms of chronic conditions, despite the advances, the progress we observed in terms of life expectancy, even life expectancy in good health. Still, many people, an increasing number of people are living with chronic conditions. Just to illustrate here, you have the women on the left-hand side, the men on the right-hand side, and a function of decades of life, the average number of conditions. This is in absolute terms, I think worldwide here. I mean, you can see, for instance, that people who are at the age of 70 to 79, they are approximately, 25% at least, who have something like 6, 7, or 8 different conditions. So this is, of course, a major burden for medicine and health globally, and we have to tackle these issues. Now, could we solve all of these issues by science and biotechnology, as I tried to illustrate it in the first part of my talk? The answer is obviously no. First of all, because there's something that is absolutely obvious but needs to be reiterated, that is, patients are human beings, and they will listen to the doctor if they wish to listen to the doctor. And we know, for instance, that patients with chronic disease, after a few years, the treatment that is prescribed in half of the case is no longer taken, which of course modifies completely what is going to happen. So it means that the direct and empathetic doctor-patient relationship and bonds is still absolutely critical and will not be replaced by artificial intelligence. AI will help, will assist healthcare workers, but not replace it. I think this is an important message. And also the next message is that beyond all of these science that we need to promote and provide better medicine, we also need another type of science. These are social sciences. This is absolutely obvious to better understand the psychology, the sociological and anthropological behavior of group of people facing medical issues. So I'd like to finish by discussing two issues that are limiting the development of healthcare. One is acceptability of new treatment or new medical measures, and then I will discuss accessibility. So there are two different terms. So acceptability, the problems could be at the individual level, could be at the level of the society in terms of prevention measures, and I will illustrate it with vaccines in a second. In terms of predictive medicine, I have no time to go in it, but it's an important question about prevention by being able to detect disease before the occurrence of clinical manifestations. And even also a trend that exists among the scientific community and of course in the society to restrain potential innovation because on the argument that this is too expensive. So we have to face this question. Just illustrate about vaccination. Everybody knows about anti-vax movements. They have been existing since vaccination has been developed, since INR. Just three pictures of it. On the left, 1900 UK, you see that this is a poster against vaccination against pox disease, variole, where the death is introducing, as you can see, the material into the child. On the right, top level, the streets of Ottawa, Canada, 2021, at the time of COVID. The truck drivers, they blocked the streets because they didn't want to have to be forced to be vaccinated. So this was an interesting situation. And finally, on the bottom, this is a poster we saw in Paris at the time of COVID again, of people who were against vaccination. They were claiming that vaccination was mandatory, which was not the case, but still they were claiming that. And we know that vaccination hesitancy is a major issue in populations. It is present in France, it's present worldwide. It is based on quite a number of problems because some allegations, as the one written in red, that's what occurred in France over the years, but there are many others. I will not go into the details. For instance, just to take one example, in the 90s, there was an allegation that vaccination against hepatitis B, that is an extremely efficient way to avoid hepatitis B, was causing multiple sclerosis. This is wrong, but still there are some discussions about it. And in UK, if you go to the extreme left, you may read Lancet publication of Wakefield paper. This is the famous paper by this British doctor who claimed that vaccination against measles was causing autism. And this is, I mean, Trump mentioned that in his campaign when he was first elected, just to give you an example. And so this problem, in addition to the development of the new media from the late 90s to now, so that group of people can diffuse wrong information easily, in the context where there is some distrust in health and political authorities, that makes this vaccination hesitancy a real issue that is not so easy to solve. But just to illustrate that problem that is still facing us. So now accessibility. There are three aspects I'd like to briefly mention. The first one, obvious one, is inequalities. There is inequalities within countries to access the right medicine, and inequalities in the world, of course. Then I will discuss the issue of problem of accessibility related to the cost of health. And finally, the issue generated by the high price of the innovative therapies I have just mentioned. Just as an example, these are data from France, and this is the life expectancy for women in red, for men in green, as a function of income. So you can see that there is quite a significant difference. So the richest people, the most wealthy one on the right-hand side, they have a life expectancy that is 5 to 10 years higher than those who are poor people. So, of course, this is generated by multiple things that I have not time to discuss, but of course, this has to be tackled if we want to make healthcare equally accessible to everyone. At the level of the world, I'm taking the example of COVID vaccine, just to show you that the rate of accessibility to vaccine was very high in countries with high income and low in countries with low incomes. And this was translated in the fact that this in countries with low income, like Sub-Saharan Africa, the death toll from COVID for people of the same age was extremely bad and much higher than in populations where vaccination occurs. So this is an obvious example. This is also illustrated by what has been recently decided by Mr. Trump. US has been relatively involved through the USAID program in helping less developed countries to have access to medicine, especially against infectious diseases. Actually, very precisely, US was the public expenses for healthcare in the world were $43 billion. So this has been just completely been abrogated by Trump. So here is an estimation of the consequences. So the top panel shows, and you see the pale gray curve. This was the reduction in the number of new HIV infections that was generated by this program and other programs worldwide. And now the situation is that if everything stays as it is today, that is without the USAID program, you see the red curve, the projection of the red curve, how the cases will increase again at much higher levels than they were today. And this is also translated, on the bottom panels in an increase, very significant increase in death. And just to summarize, a world without USAID, this is taken from a Nature issue, a recent Nature issues, show the number of people who probably, if nothing changed, will die during the next 15 years. So you see for AIDS, it's estimated to be 15 million people. For tuberculosis, 1 or 2 million, and other infectious disease of children, 7 million. So the consequences are there, but also indirectly it shows that things can be done. I mean, if there is an involvement of the most wealthy countries to assist and also to develop medicine locally, one can do much better. But this is, of course, a very, very critical issue. Now, health expenditure. Health expenditure has increased very, very significantly, as you can see, since the end of the 19th century in all countries, but with differences. You see an envelope of curves that are more or less similar, reaching between 7, 8 to 11, 12% of GDP that is used for health. Interestingly, for Cyprus, you see the curve, there has been a sharp increase apparently in expenses over the last years, and now Cyprus has reached the level of expenses of nearby countries like Italy, for instance. And now the same kind of data, but expressed per capita, and you see that, well, the Europe more or less is, with a few differences, has several level of health expenditures, and of course the less developed countries are contributing less to their health to expenses, to expenditures, and then there is the contrast with United States, with the world champion in health expenditure. Interestingly enough, there is overall a correlation between life expectancy and health expenditure. You see here you have a curve with most of the countries are there. France is here, Cyprus is there, well, virtually coming in the same region. But then there is a major exception, which is United States. This is United States before Mr. Trump. So even before him, despite the fact that they have huge level of expenses, they are doing much less well here in terms of life expectancy, and we know there are more obese people and so on and so on. So to have high level of health expenditures plays a role, but you need also to have an appropriate healthcare system, and the US situation demonstrated it very well. I don't know how I stand about time, because I may, if I'm too long, I will, please tell me. Okay. So another 5-6 minutes is okay. All right, I'd like to discuss the price of drugs, starting with gene therapies, but also in other innovative medicine. As you will see on the next slide, these prices are outrageously high. So generating, for instance, these kind of papers published in Nature Medicine or other journals like gene therapies should be for all, which is not the case, or CAR T cells, I mentioned earlier, and cellular gene therapies are too expensive. Just I show you what it is. These are some prices. It is increasing new drug by new drug. If you look at the number 4, this is a fantastic treatment, by the way, by gene therapy of a rare disease named metachromatic leukodystrophy. It's a terrible neuromuscular disease that is genetically determined. So the price of the treatment, which is probably efficient even on the long term, is reaching almost 3 million euros or dollars, whatever. Okay? And for others, it's slightly less, but it's still. And even for the treatment, the CAR T cells that are used extensively now, more than 50,000 patients treated worldwide, more than 1,000 patients treated a year in France. The price per patient is 400,000. So you can calculate what it represents. And beyond gene therapy, for other rare diseases, for instance, there is a disease named Gaucher, where one can substitute the missing protein, so by injections. This is not gene therapy. That has to be repeated every week or every month for life. The treatment is 90,000 euros per year in France. Cystic fibrosis, another genetic disease, where a new treatment has been developed recently that is really good, but for every single patient, the price is approximately 200,000 euros a year. Just to give you an idea, in France, there are 6,000 such patients. So you can multiply 6,000 by 200,000. It gives you, and then even worse than you will see, as you will see. For more common diseases, I mentioned monoclonal antibodies. They are terrific drugs, but the treatment per cure, and patients may receive more than one cure, is approximately 50,000 euros a cure. And then I'd like to spend 2 minutes about the treatment of obesity, because this is something new that is scientifically sound, interesting, but raising a major issue in terms of availability. Just to give you an idea of the problem, in France, we have approximately 8 million people who are obese, and they are mostly, as in other countries, people with low income, so limited resources for health. So treatment of obesity, which is new since the last 5 years, is based on a drug, semaglutide, I don't know, and related ones that are agonists from a given metabolic receptors. I will not go into detail. First used to stimulate the secretion of insulin for patients with diabetes type 2, and it works pretty well. But also it was found, and this is extremely interesting, is that this drug is regulating food intake at the level of the brain. So that people do eat less, and because of that, thanks to that, their weight is diminishing, as you will see in a second. It's leading to something like a loss of 10 to 50% weight in 1 year, which is really significant. And also, on top of it, is reducing the complications of obesity, like cardiovascular diseases or osteoarthritic complications. Just to illustrate what I said, this is data of patients treated either with placebo, this is on the top, the gray triangles, or with the drug for 4 years. And you can see that there is a stable reduction in weight. So this is quite an interesting drug that is, by the way, relatively well tolerated. But the treatment costs approximately between 3,000 and 4,000 euros a year, knowing that the cost of production of the drug is 50 euros. Okay? The first drug that has been developed by the Danish pharma Novo Nordisk, that has increased its revenue in 4 years by a factor of 2, doubling his revenues, and with profit that as high as 36% from their global chiffre d'affaires. So in France, if we make the calculation, and of course every country can make the same similar calculation, if we would to treat only severe obesity above a certain level, it will cost 6 billion per year. 6 milliards, sorry, I forgot to translate. So 6 billion euros a year, which represents approximately 20% of the drug expenses in France. So it's a major problem, which leads to the following. So the drug is accessible in France. I don't know how it is in Cyprus, but it is available in France since October 2024 with strict recommendations of usage, but up to now with no reimbursement from public national insurances. So reimbursement may be considered for extreme obesity. It's not yet decided. But for instance, and this is very important, two major European countries, Germany and Italy, they have decided, because of the cost, they consider that the cost-benefit ratio is not favorable, so that this drug is not available to treat patients with obesity in Germany and Italy. The obvious consequence is here we have, unfortunately, what is the first example of a drug that is effective, but not meant accessible to everyone, either as a function of country or as a function of incomes. So I think this is an ethical issue, and beyond the ethical issue, a serious problem for medicine. So I will skip the next slides because that will be too long. We may discuss it, if you like, what we can be done to limit these extreme prices of innovative medicine, and go directly to the conclusion. To say, first of all, that was the first part, of my talk. Over the years, especially the last 20 years, there has been remarkable advances in medicine thanks to scientific research and research in mathematics, computer science, chemistry, physics, and social sciences. So we need, medicine is based on all of these pillars. This is obvious. And by the way, scientific research by itself is not sufficient, because in the US, that was up to now the leader in medical research, you have seen that the healthcare performances are not as good as they are in many other countries. So this is very promising for the future. There are many different directions. I mentioned some of them, but there are others for future advances, future improvement. But this is associated with a very significant rising cost of the healthcare system. So generating the questions, who is going to pay and to pay what, and which part of the GDP we will accept in the future to use for healthcare. This is, of course, these are open questions. And then the next question, based on what I just described, how to make advances available to everyone. This is less than obvious. Obviously, there is a necessity to regulate the prices of drugs, but worldwide, this is obviously extremely difficult. And finally, maybe the last word is to say that for many of these diseases, one way to advance that is less costly and maybe, by the way, accessible to everyone if education and healthcare policy are done properly is prevention for many, many aspects of medicine, like infectious disease, obesity. I mean, obesity, once people are obese, they're obese, but prevention of obesity by education and a number of measures are absolutely key, and there are many, many, many other examples. Okay, I will finish here, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Fischer, for this thought-provoking and insightful lecture. I now open the floor to questions from the audience.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Alain, for this wonderful talk, and I liked especially the two parts, because one is pure science, the other is more complex but extremely important. Usually, the difference between the price of production of a drug and the sale price is very often explained because of the cost of the research and the fact that with a patent you have to protect the company during a certain time to get the money back in selling the product at a high price. Okay, so my question is very simple. When the patent expired, do we see effectively a very strong decrease of the sale price because of the competition due to the fact that everybody can make the drug? The generic.
Yes and no. Yes, because indeed there is a significant reduction in prices, but not always. There are, I mentioned, I think, the Gaucher disease with enzymotherapy. Now, there are 3 drugs that are similar to treat that disease. The 3 drugs, despite the competition, are just at the same price. Okay, so this is not going to, up to now, to reduce the prices. So, but in some instances, yes, you are right, and this is a way to have more accessible drugs. But still, I'd like to come back to your first part of your question when you mentioned, of course, part of the price is based on the cost of research and development. But only part of it. Actually, the fraction that is used for other purposes, that is, for instance, communication about the drugs and profit, is higher than the one that is related to research and development. This is not easy to get these informations because the companies are not keen to provide these informations, but still we know globally this is the case. And by the way, from these innovative therapies, with almost no exception, there are a few exceptions, but not many, the invention came from the academic world. Gene therapy is all of them, for instance. And of course, then there is an agreement, a licensing, and so that there is some profit for the academic system. But I think this is not equilibrated. I think we have to do something about it. One possible way to go, at least at the European level, is to no longer negotiate the price country by country, as it is the case today, but to do it at the level of the European Union. This is not utopia because this has been done. It has been done for the COVID vaccines, where the European Union negotiated with Pfizer and the others, and they got significant reduction, and by the way, they ensured access to potentially all of the European citizens. So what has been done for COVID vaccine could be done for gene therapy products, for many other innovative drugs. This will be not the end of the problem, but at least will have in Europe a certain effect, given that the European market is very important for industry. I mean, it's as high as the North American one. So this is one way to go. There are others. It's not easy. Oh, it's okay. High levels. If you ask the pharmas, they will mention these 3 things here. That these innovative therapies are usually sophisticated products that took time and they are not so easy to develop, so this is more costly, which is true. That for these rare diseases, the market is small, so in order to have a revenue, you need to have a higher price. And then that for many of these new therapies, they consider, quote, quote, value-based pricing. That is, you had a disease, for instance, that was inducing death after 10 to 20 years, for instance, and now this person will live potentially 50, 70, 80 years. So the value is extremely high. So based on these 3 parameters, this is how they advocate for these high prices, and this has been relatively accepted by insurance companies and health authorities, totally in the US, where there is virtually no negotiation, and partially in Europe. Nevertheless, one may also argue, as I just said, okay, they are sophisticated products, but most of them were developed within the academic research groups in different places, that there is not always a relationship between price and market size, by the way. I have no time to show you examples. And okay, the benefit is real, so the value-based pricing has some interest, but it may be partial, it could be transient, and if we would follow this concept, for instance, let's tomorrow I have a sepsis, I have received antibiotics, the price of which will be 50 euros, and these antibiotics will save my life. So according to this criterion, the antibiotics should be sold for 1 million euros or something like that. So it doesn't make sense. So we have to change the paradigm.
Yes.
Stavros,
Yes. I will refer again to the rare diseases because when I was in the Commission, it was one of the problems that we faced because there are thousands of rare diseases, unknown, most of them around the world. And of course, the pharmaceuticals refused to produce drugs because of the small market and of course the cost of the production and the cost of research and the production. And there was a thought at the time that the European Union should contribute and support the research for rare diseases. Do you know whether there has been any progress in the last decade or so?
I will distinguish two things, the support of preclinical research and then the development of drugs. In terms of preclinical research, honestly, situation is not so bad. I mean, let's talk about Europe these days. There are possibilities through the classic ways of getting grants to get a reasonable amount of money, and on top of it, there are a number of charities that also support research on rare diseases. It's not so bad. The question comes at okay, you have generated a concept, you have a potential drug, you do the first proof of principle, and it shows it works, so you go to the stage of development, and then this is where the interaction with industry starts, and this is today difficult because for some of them, the proof of principle has been shown that drugs can be developed and commercialized. They are now, the farmers, I mean, they are less keen to continue. So one potential solution is what is written here. That's why I put this slide, which is being discussed these days, is for such innovative therapies to try to develop non-profit structures, pharmaceutical companies, but with non-profit, based on public funding initially, on foundations, and Europe, of course, could play a role in this, in order to produce these drugs. And this is the case for CAR T cells, despite the fact this is not so rare, because there is one example I will briefly describe in a short while, as well as for rare diseases. So for CAR T cells, in the university hospital in Barcelona, they have decided to produce their own CAR T cells. So they no longer rely on the big pharmas that produce the CAR T cells. And interestingly enough, they have been successful in doing it for local patients. They can't treat patients elsewhere because of the patents, but at least locally they can treat their patients at the price of 90,000 euros, which is 4 times less than the price of the farmers. So this is an example, and I think we should build on this example. They have shown it is feasible. There is an initiative in Canada, BioCan RX, where they will develop 6 centers this is for gene therapy, but it could be used for other purposes. There will be 6 centers in provinces of Canada where, and in a non-profit way, they will produce what we call the vectors, viruses or other things, as well as cells if they have to be modified before injected to the patient. So the drugs will be prepared in a way that the price should just equilibrate the cost. So I think this is a way to go. Again, this is not going to work like that, but Europe, I think, has to really consider this strategy, especially based on the one developed in Barcelona. Actually, I'm going to Barcelona in 2 weeks to see exactly how they do it and how they balance the expenses. I think this is one of the way to go.
Thank you very much, first of all, for a fantastic lecture. It was really very, very inspiring and very, impressive. My question is the following. when I take when I'm being vaccinated against measles, I get a vaccine before I'm ill. With immunotherapy, you get the treatment when you're sick. Can you imagine one day that there's a vaccine which boosts our immune system to such an extent that a number of these things won't happen? Or is that naive?
No, it's a good question. There has been a number of drugs developed over the last 100 years, so-called immunostimulant drugs, with that purpose. They don't work. And this is a good thing they don't work, because if they would work, they would have induced inflammatory, allergic, and autoimmune diseases. Now, having said that, what you say is not totally a dream, provided one would be able to target specifically the component of the immune system that may induce, say, a given autoimmune disease or a given inflammatory, say, Crohn's disease, for instance. We are very far from that. But, I mean, this comes with the concept of inducing, say, specific tolerance or specific control of an immune response. This is a key field of research in, I would say, basic science research in immunology today. So maybe one day, not us, but the next generation, they may see it.
Thank you, Alan, for an exhilarating talk. Now, I want to ask you, you showed a slide about expenditure in health, which had a very strong message. I say this because we have implemented the national health system, and it's very important. So you showed that the United States are spending a huge amount of money, yes, but the result is actually well below to countries that are spending far less. So Cyprus, even in 2010 and 11, has spent one of the lowest in Europe in health, but it had one of the best health indicators. So, and it was actually taken by WHO. So I'm giving that example also to highlight something, that one key word that you ended up your talk, and obviously, right. So if you look at the asymmetry between spending for treating a disease and spending to prevent the disease, that's where the fallacy lies. As you know, the two biggest killers are CVD, cardiovascular disease, and cancer. Those are chronic diseases. Half of the people in this room suffer from CVD at certain level, but they just don't know it. So this is, and the biggest challenge in medicine, you will agree with me, is actually to detect the disease early, but even to prevent it even much earlier, and it's very, very cheap. So Germany spends 0.99 of its GDP for prevention. Cyprus spends 0.23 of its GDP for prevention, and we're spending a lot of money to treat many of our bad habits, essentially. I mean, so you will agree with me that
I fully agree. Then maybe to make the picture slightly more complex, as you know, there is, primary prevention, secondary prevention, tertiary prevention. And the more you go, the more expensive it is. So it's not going to solve everything, but I fully agree we have to put all our efforts, and in France there is a real need, because our expenses in terms of fraction of GDP that go to prevention is even less. It's 0. I don't remember exactly, but maybe 0.1. So this is really, politically speaking, this is where we have to go as a priority.
Thank you, sir. I have two questions. When? The picture...
yes. Sorry, excuse me.
Yes, I have two questions. The picture you painted is like the entire world is sitting on a keg of gunpowder, particularly with the low level of research now in the US. At the level of the European Union, I hope all of these are detailed to them so that they will know that if anything like what happened during the pandemic occurs, peradventure occurs again, the entire world will not be wiped out, particularly with the kind of man we have at the helms in the US right now. That's number one. Number two, it has to do with low-income countries where I come from. Nigeria is a low-income country. And these low-income countries also have huge populations. I hope they are being factored into all of this. Or I hope their governments are also being made aware of some of these consequences. Thank you.
No, I agree. I mean, you are stressing important questions. Maybe I would like to give a positive note about based on COVID. I mean, the vaccination against COVID is a fantastic success, despite, as I showed, the unequal distribution of vaccines. Hopefully, this may change in the future. There has been a pandemic agreement just signed, pandemic treaty signed with WHO, signed by all of the countries but two, US and Argentina, which is clear. But maybe leading, if it works, there will be a better distribution of vaccine. But still now, going on the positive side, within a few months, once the virus was isolated, that took only a few days, the sequence was known, another few days. Some research was performed, like going to get the three-dimensional structure of the spike I mentioned. A few weeks, vaccine development started based on previous research on messenger RNA, obviously, and based on a major investment, public investment from the US mostly. I have to say this is the Trump administration, I have to admit. They put $18 billion to provide up to $2 billion per pharma so that they could speed up the process of testing vaccines, producing vaccines, and eventually deliver the vaccines. So this was a success of science, of cooperation, and in this case, of finances. So it may work. Well, I mean, this is a nice example, and it is estimated that this vaccination has saved approximately 20 million lives. But now, very unequal, obviously, as I showed, especially in Central Africa, it didn't work. So we have to do better. But we can, if we work properly together, and this pandemic treaty, I think, is a good step forward, we can make progress.
I have a question on about this slide here, because as far as I remember, the position of United States in the graph is because of people who are killed, people who are dying because of overdose of drugs, and
Opioids,
people who commit suicide. So
yes.
as far as I remember, this shift is because of three causes of death, which are, I think, in the States more than cancer and this is what I think.
No, maybe
I've
not
been
that
saving.
yeah.
I've been saving the chart. I think I found in the one world of data. So I was impressed that this is becoming the. So I go back to what you were saying, that in the let's say in the healthcare system of the future, social sciences are going to play a big role. So are, let's say, social activities and social policies going to become a significant part of the healthcare system, or they should be?
It should be.
Because if this is the case, that's the priority in the States, and probably will be the priority
No,
here.
you're right. I mean, the opioids crisis is absolutely terrible. Suicide, but by the way, obesity also is leading through cardiovascular diseases to a major death toll in the US. So it's a bit more than just opioids and suicide. But I mean, the message is there. I agree. I mean, and we have to work on this, obviously, and they have to work on this in the US. Yes.
Thanks for this inspiring, highly interesting lecture. I was thinking, is it about the right time to switch the healthcare policies based on the healthcare economics and to the economy of health?
Could you elaborate a bit more your question?
Healthcare economics has been the base of the dictating policy in delivering healthcare in every aspect, from bench to clinical medicine. Maybe now, based on prevention and harm reduction from diseases that we already know that they could have been preventable, it's about time the policy to be moving on the principle of the economy of health rather than the healthcare economics.
No, of course, this is back what we discussed a few minutes ago about the importance of prevention. But still, I do not want to be, I would say, too strong on that message, because let's consider prevention of cardiovascular disease. Okay, you do much better, so the people will live longer, but after some time they will develop another chronic disease or other chronic diseases later on in life. So the macroeconomical picture after some time may still be problematic. But that's not to say we should not go to prevention, because at least if we can have most of the people to live in a good health up to 80 or 90 years of age, that won't be too bad. Okay.
On behalf of the Cyprus Institute, I would like to express our heartfelt thanks to Professor Fisher and all our distinguished guests for joining us this evening. Special thanks also to the Ambassador of the Republic of France, Ms. Clélia Givrier-Colago. Thank you. You are warmly invited to a cocktail reception just outside the auditorium. Thank you once again for being with us tonight, and we're wishing you all a very pleasant evening. Thank you. Thank you.